I just burst into tears when I saw him. And it was just this overwhelming emotion that I'd kind of been suppressing for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jodi Richardson, and this is Well, Hello Anxiety. In a world that often moves too fast, we're here to pause, breathe, and understand anxiety together. Each episode will explore practical strategies, share honest conversations, and uncover the science behind anxiety and well-being, all while creating a space where it's okay to not be okay. Let's continue this journey together. Hello and welcome back to another episode. Oh gosh, I have the most extraordinary guest today, and it is such a pleasure to be introducing you to Connor Scott, someone who has walked a deeply personal mental health journey and who has kind of continued on that journey with a mission to make sure others don't have to walk their mental health journey alone. And his mission is so powerful. It drove him to do something that will make your jaw drop. I kid you not. When you hear what he accomplished in pursuit of raising money for Speak and Share, a mental health organisation, your mind will be blown. And it just speaks to the deep commitment that Connor has to the work that he does, raising awareness and making sure that people get the support that they need. He's the founder of The Running Therapist, where he helps people find themselves through movement, and you'll be fascinated to hear how he works as a counsellor, combining time outdoors, running, movement with his clients and coffee. And it's not about the results. It's one of the organisations he has co-founded is called Mind Over Miles, and so it's really all about mental health and well-being. So co-founder of Mind Over Miles, and also 9 for 9, which is something that Connor will share a little bit more with us about as well. He's also a physiotherapist, so very accomplished, and it's just an absolute joy to welcome you to the podcast, Connor. I'm so grateful for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. That was very kind of you.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. And we met years ago, didn't we? When I think it was in COVID, I was a guest on your the Zoop Network podcast, and then we both were at a youth mental health forum recently. We both spoke at a forum on the Mornington Peninsula. So we reconnected then, and I'm like, please come and join me on my podcast. So Connor, I guess listeners are probably thinking, well, what is this extraordinary fundraising accomplishment? Let's maybe start there, just to kind of talk through what it was that you were able to do to raise money for Speak and Share. But after that, I'd love to sort of go back and help listeners understand kind of where you've come from and where you're at now, because one of the things that we all need, especially if we're struggling with our mental health, is hope. And, you have that in spades for anybody who gets to hear your story. So let's start with the fundraiser though, please.
Yeah, so I think it was 2023. I ran 50 kilometres a day for 50 days to raise money for Speak and Share.
50 kilometres a day for 50 days. Like, we've spoken about this, and you have shared with me both the emotional, psychological and physical recovery from that undertaking took about 18 months. It is such a commitment and something that takes so much time, effort, training and a significant toll. Tell us kind of how this all came about.
Running had always been something that had been a positive in my mental health. It had always been something that had supported my well-being. I always noticed that whenever I was in a bit of a slump, running was the thing to fall off. And kind of, and I know we'll go into this a little bit later, but when I was in a really dark place, running was the thing that got me out. And it was doing running with friends that got me out of that. So my thought process was to use the tool that had facilitated my own journey to then use that as a tool or a vessel to raise awareness for mental ill health.
I remember you sharing your story at the forum that we spoke at a few weeks ago, and how you said you met somebody when you started your physiotherapy degree, and that you weren't in a good place. That was kind of when that you made a commitment to each other, didn't you, to kind of get moving? Tell our listeners a little bit more about that, because I think what you inadvertently found was this magic kind of combination of connection, an opportunity to tick things off each week to accomplish something, movement, conversation. And it's just a really beautiful part to your story.
Yeah, one of my best mates, Jerome, who I started the 9 for 9 and the Zoop network with, it actually all came about from this conversation I had with him. And I'd reached out to him because I was struggling with my mental health, and we'd just gone into lockdown. And in that moment, when I called him, and he was just exactly what you'd want a best mate to be. He held the conversation. He just listened. He was empathetic, kind, understanding, and he didn't really have the words to support me at that time, but he was like, there's one thing I know about you, and the one thing I know about you is that you love to run, and that's something I've noticed you slipping up with. So why don't we organize a little bit of a challenge where we both go for a run 3 days a week, and we've got to send each other the receipt of that run. And if we don't do the run, every Friday we'll check in, we'll talk about the runs, we'll see how they went. And if we haven't done it, we'll put $50 into a kitty, and then we can do something nice together. So when we did that, it was the perfect timing, because for me, I didn't really want to talk about my mental health too much. I wanted to make him aware, but it kind of became a conversation starter in the sense that every Friday night we'd have a phone call, and that phone call would be about the running. And as time started to evolve, it became less about the running and more of a check-in and a really in-depth conversation for two 22-year-old, 23-year-old guys who had never spoken about this stuff before. And when we did that, we were like, this is really great. This is helping us. So we actually broadened it to our group of friends. Yeah. And it ended up being that there was 10, 15 of us every Friday night with our own little mini goals. We had someone trying to do kick flips on a skateboard, someone trying to do headstands, sending videos throughout the week of their receipts of doing it. And throughout a time where we were all incredibly disconnected due to the lockdown, it gave us that piece of connection, but also gave us a space to talk about what we had going on in our lives.
It's so extraordinary when you talk about, a group of young men. It started off with you and Jerome, and incidentally, I had met Jerome prior to connecting with you to be a guest on your podcast, and I met him just to say a little bit more about Jerome and the sort of person he is. I shared this with you the other night, didn't I? That I used to have a copper band from an organisation called Band for Hope. And the idea for the bands, everyone had a registration code on it. And the idea was you would buy a band or be gifted one, and you would wear it and you would register it. And then when you felt compelled to gift it to someone for the band to go on its next journey, you would gift it. And then the idea is that person then registers it, and you can watch where your bands move around the globe. And I was on a plane back from a speaking opportunity interstate, and I sat next to Jerome, and we got chatting, and I gifted him my band. And I don't know if Band for Hope are operating anymore, but he is an extraordinary young man. And the fact that you felt comfortable enough in your friendship to be able to share, but that's not the norm really, is it? It's, for young men in particular, for a lot of young people, and then to open that up to your group. What kind of difference did you see that made over time for both of you? And what do you think made the most difference for you and your mental health with that big group and that regular connection?
It gave an opportunity for me personally to feel safe in a space to be emotionally vulnerable. Within that group of people, I had facilitated a facade of the happy-go-lucky, funny, party type of individual. And when lockdown happened, that kind of took a little bit of that personality away. And I could actually show my mates and people who were my friends the real kind of me. And we still talk about it to this day, around how that was one of the highlights of our lives, is that how connected we were in that moment, that every week we would look forward to that. And I remember I was the first person to share anything emotionally vulnerable within that group. And it was like a waterfall afterwards. Then it was every single person after me spoke to what they were going through at that time. And we were so used to conversations that were going to the pub, have a few beers, we'd talk about work, we'd talk about sport, we'd talk about whatever it may be, but not one conversation did we have a real conversation unless we were under the influence of alcohol and you get a bit upset. By the next day, it was forgotten about and everyone moved on. Whereas within this space, we were very open and we could just, the way we spoke in lockdown and you couldn't talk over each other. And it was like the perfect way, because if you spoke over each other, the internet would, get in the way and you had to listen until that person was done. And we learned more about each other in that year than we had in the 4 or 5 years at uni. And it's built like a lifetime of connection between that group of people.
Oh, I can only begin to imagine it, but it does take one person to have the courage, doesn't it, to be able to open up. And when the conversations previously have probably been about, you're all physiotherapists, so, I'm guessing you're all at uni together, yes, doing physiotherapy, and that there's a lot of sport, a lot of bravado, a lot of achievement, and yet we all have challenges, we all have struggles, and the minute that you were courageous enough to say something, you opened the door and you've changed the lives of the friends in your friendship group, and you're changing many more lives now, because I know now that you're working not only as a physiotherapist but also as a counsellor, and I can't wait to talk about all of that. But I think for all of our listeners that, it's finding someone, isn't it, that you can feel safe enough to be able to open up to. But also, you said about Jerome that he didn't really know exactly what to say. And that's okay as well, that if you do open up, that if we're on the receiving end, if we're trusted enough, that if we do listen. And what would you say to the person who's like, well, but I feel stuck, I feel like I'm supposed to kind of help and I don't know how to help? What would you say to them about how to respond?
Well, yeah, firstly, I want to acknowledge that that's an incredibly challenging and scary place to be, is on the receiving end of that conversation. I think there's a lot of emphasis on trying to get, young men especially to speak up. And there's probably less emphasis on how we teach people how to respond or how we can learn from that. What Jerome did in that moment was, the biggest thing I can say is empathy and hold the space. There's a beautiful video by Brené Brown on vulnerability, and it's a little animation that talks about the difference between sympathy and empathy, and not using the words at least you have this, at least it's not that bad. I think the biggest advice with me is, if they have trusted you to come and have that conversation, they obviously see something within you and they just want you to be there and hold that space with them. One of the biggest things that's been helpful as I've gone through my journey is asking the question of, what do you need from me, as a way of bridging that gap. Because I think, and it comes from a place of care and compassion to try and advise and to try and support. But I think that sometimes, I know from my personal experience, as soon as someone tried to do that with me, I would switch completely off and it would go in one ear, out the other. Whereas as soon as they would ask, what do you need from me? It really made me reflect to go, actually, what do I need? Maybe I just need you to listen right now. Maybe I need to go for a walk. Maybe I just need you to check in on me. And then it's it's a team approach rather than two individuals coming at it.
I love that you can actually just say that, can't you? And I know that Brené Brown clip, and she talks about, what makes someone feel heard is connection, that, the response isn't what makes it better. But just to be honest and to say, I'm not, and again, this is part of that clip, that I'm not really sure what to say right now, but I'm just so glad you told me. And then, to say, how can I help? And often it is just somebody to listen and to hear you. And like you say, that empathy and that, even just that validation, isn't it? Just to say, wow, that sounds really, really hard. Thank you for sharing that with me. And not feeling like you have to have all the answers, like you said. And for your journey, Connor, I've been where you've been. I heard you share your story, the time that you had. You did such a beautiful job of it because you really walked us through kind of the experiences that you went through. But you've been the lowest a person can be. And you at such a young age now, you are on the other side of that. No doubt, our mental health journey isn't a one and done necessarily. It's something that we walk with for our lives. Can you share a bit more about kind of your journey and kind of, from where you were to where you are now?
Yeah, I grew up in Liverpool. So Liverpool is in the UK, and it's somewhere that I am incredibly proud to be from. It's like hardworking people, funny, humor, culture. It's one of my favorite places on earth, and I love it. But it comes with hardship. And Liverpool is a relatively low socioeconomic place. When I was a kid, we didn't have a lot. I grew up and, we'd check the back of our couch for coins, sometimes to get dinner. We would constantly be receiving letters that our stuff was going to come and be taken because my parents couldn't afford the bills. And even walking down the street, at night time, my mum and I would walk with keys between our fingers in terms of an element of safety. When I reflect on it, it was complete normality for me. Like at that point, like I was a kid, and that was just a normal part of day to day. And when we moved to Australia, I couldn't believe how lucky we were after a while, after I dug my heels into the ground about moving. But once we got here, and the safety at night and the kindness was just extraordinary when we moved out here. But I'd always been, it was the big emphasis on me growing up was that education was number one. And I had to work incredibly hard to be the first person to go to university, to study hard, to play sport. I played soccer growing up. I had to excel in that. There was a bit of pressure on me to kind of excel, which became a part of my identity, I guess, was the high achiever and the hard worker. When I was in year 11, so we moved to Australia, and my parents started going through some relationship difficulties, which isn't uncommon. But I remember having to, or trying to support my mum and my siblings as best as I could. My dad had gone back to Liverpool for a period of time, and that was the first time I'd felt a little different. And the reason I say a little different is probably because I didn't have the words to actually say what that was at that time. But what I can remember feeling was lazy. That was the word I was using to describe myself, was just incredibly lazy, which wasn't something I would usually say. And on reflection, I think that laziness was overwhelmed and maybe anxious and sad. But back then it was not able to get out of bed, being late for school, not doing my work, which was just a little bit out of the ordinary for me. Yeah. And at that time, I remember going into school, and it was after the school holidays, and I hadn't done any work, and I went to see my coordinator. And at that time, I just burst into tears when I saw him. And it was just this overwhelming emotion that I'd kind of been suppressing for weeks and weeks and weeks. And that was kind of the first time I had started to feel a little bit different from there. Once I got kind of past that and, things kind of move on, I got through uni, and then my parents finally separated. I'd been in a relationship for 4 years or so, and then my auntie, who's my mum's sister, and my mum's sister married my dad's brother. So we were kind of like a very tight-knit group. She passed away from alcohol-related liver disease. And all that happened within a couple of months. And I just remember feeling that like everything that I loved had just been taken from under me. And at that time, I couldn't describe what was happening. Like I just started full-time work. I felt overwhelmed within that. Every morning I'd wake up feeling like there was an elephant standing on my chest. I was struggling to breathe. I remember going for lunch in Woolies and feeling like I couldn't breathe, and then I was going to have panic attacks, and then I was having subsequent panic attacks between patients at work, and it was just this overwhelming sense of, I don't think I'm okay at the moment.
Goodness me. And especially in that kind of work, that relational work of being a physiotherapist, and inevitably people are coming to you with their own challenges because of what's happening with their bodies and their limitations and their worries. And so you're not only struggling yourself, but you're really working hard to support other people over and over and over again during the day. And that feeling, that elephant on the chest, and that feeling of not being able to breathe properly, and then panic attacks, like, goodness me, it's a wonder that you were able to keep functioning. And so what was kind of like the turning point for you? Because that's only sustainable for so long, isn't it? Like that's unsustainable.
Yeah. And I was still at that point where I felt too ashamed to share that with anyone. It was that I'd go out into my day-to-day life and still try and wear the mask of, I'm okay, I can achieve, I can accomplish, here's the face that I'm going to wear in public. And it felt as though that mask got heavier and heavier, and I could only sustain it for shorter and shorter periods of time. When I was at my lowest, I remember I was just sitting at home, and for some reason I had started drinking after work, and there was this one night in which and it was a normal work night, and I'd had more than I usually would, and I just remember thinking, I am a waste of time. Like, this is just not worth it. And at that point, I was like, I can't do this anymore, and I made an attempt to take my life. Fortunately, and very fortunately, my grandma, she's actually living here now, but she was living over in the UK, and she called me. She must have seen that I was like online on WhatsApp and thought it was strange, and she called, and just at the right moment, at the right time, and that conversation was one that I think I look back on and kind of saved my life. Yeah. She was the one who got me to kind of talk to my mum, to try and get support, to try and see a GP and do all of those things to support me.
Oh, goodness, that timing. I'm sure that's created a bond between you and your grandma, that obviously you had a close bond, but now after you, obviously when she called, you were able to share what was happening in that moment. And Connor, honestly, I'm wondering whether or not when you did share with your mum, and thank you for sharing that with us, because, you know, we do know that, 9 for 9, is it correct to say a suicide attempt in Australia every 9 minutes?
It is 9 lives are lost to suicide every day in Australia.
I beg your pardon. Thank you very much. And so it is a huge issue, especially among our men, our wonderful men. And was your mum surprised? Was it completely quite a shock to her when you shared just how bad things were for you? Did she know?
I think she had a mother's intuition, but I don't think she understood the depths of hurt that I was in.
Yeah.
I think that she knew I was struggling, and I had distanced myself from her and from, the people who care. And so she was aware something was wrong, but I think she was surprised to hear just how bad it was.
Yeah. Because, and you talked about the mask, and it makes me think of so many other families who have been faced with the same situation, where there's been a young person attempting to take their own life or succeeding, and people just being left absolutely reeling and shocked that they just didn't know. And for anyone who is worried that that could be the situation in their family, what can people say to someone who they suspect might be struggling, or even if they're not suspecting that, just to kind of open the door to make sure that that doesn't ever feel like that's the only option? What are a couple of things that maybe could have been said to you by people in your circle that might have just made the difference that things didn't get quite as far as they did with you?
I think when someone would ask me whether I was okay, I would build a wall against that. And it was a protective, when someone asks you, how are you? And your automatic response is good. It became one of those, and I kind of shied away from the question. Something that was probably better for me at that time was I've noticed you've not been doing this. Do you want to check in, or do you want to? I was really bad with phone calls, so if you called me, I would ignore that. I still am bad with phone calls, but not for that reason. But it was very much I've noticed you haven't been doing this, just wanted to check in. And that would become a little bit more of a thoroughfare for me to open up, especially with family. And for someone like my mum, who I felt from a very young age, I wanted or needed to protect in some way, that became challenging to be the person who relied on her. Yeah. And after that conversation with my nan, my mum and I just drove down to Oliver's Hill in Frankston, and I remember it was a winter, dark, rain was smacking the car windows, and we were just sitting there side by side, and I could just look out into the rain, into the waves, and kind of just not engage, but could just talk into the open air rather than have to make that direct eye contact. So I always found that I was more talkative within side to side contact versus sitting across for a coffee or, sitting at dinner. I would always shy away from that. But if I was moving, and if I was going for a walk, or if I was sitting side by side going for a drive, I was much more open.
Yes, and it's something that I hear a lot of people say, especially about men, boys, teenage boys, and that sitting side by side, being adjacent and doing something, or it's just much less confrontational. It's a much safer place to come from, isn't it? And for those of you who don't know Oliver's Hill, which is in Frankston on the Mornington Peninsula here in Victoria in Australia, there's a lookout which is over Port Phillip Bay, and I can just picture, the weather was really representative of how you were feeling, and no doubt there was some privacy that came with it being dark and wintry and raining, and honestly, Connor, just for you to share that with us, and for you to now be in a place where you have a deep personal understanding of how difficult it can be when you are struggling with your mental health, and for you to know that running is something that not only helps you to feel better in and of itself because of the beautiful endorphins that we have released when we are moving, it's so powerful, but to do a fundraiser, 50 kilometres a day for 50 days, and then now to have kind of launched the running therapist. Connor, honestly, you have obviously such a deeply personal experience with your own mental health over many, many years. And I'm so grateful to you for not only sharing it with us today, but the incredible work that you do, the fundraising that you've done. And I'd love to talk with you more about the work that you're doing now, a little bit more about the incredible fundraiser, but also your work as the running therapist, the Mind Over Miles club that you have down in Rosebud. Would you have time to stick around, and we'll continue this conversation in a part 2?
Absolutely, I would love to.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. I really encourage you to check out Connor. You'll find all of his details on Instagram, Connor Scott 10 on Instagram, CONNORSCOTT10, where you can see links to the running therapist, Mind Over Miles, 9 for 9. Follow all the incredible work that he is doing, and Please, if you are in need of extra support, please reach out to somebody in your circle for extra help. And join us next week where Connor and I will pick up exactly where we left off. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing this time with me on, well, hello anxiety. Remember, understanding anxiety is the first step to managing it. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. Take things one moment at a time. Focus on what you can control and know that you are not alone on this journey. If you found value in today's episode, please share it with someone who might need to hear it too. I'm Dr. Jodi Richardson, and I'll meet you right back here next week.